Hello and welcome. This is Jennifer McGuire. Today I recorded myself making a bunch of holiday cards for the Carrying Hearts card drive, and I thought I'd share them in a video. So this video is a little bit longer because there are so many cards. All of these cards have one thing in common, and that is that I used an inked inlay technique. So I'm just going to share a bunch of tips along the way. Let's go ahead and dive in with the first card that you see here. I have some white cardstock. I'm just using regular white cardstock for all of this. And I am using different types of window dies that kind of cut a window onto your card, and I'll do an inlay technique with them. So for this, I'm going to die cut this twice from white cardstock, one that I'm going to ink up and one that I'm going to use for the inlay technique. If you've never done inlay, it's basically where you pop the pieces back in to create like a puzzle piece look that's nice and smooth. So I'm using some Post-it tape just to hold the pieces together in the back. So all those pieces are in their right place. And I'm just going to add some soft ink to this. I'm using Distress ink and Clarity brushes just so I can get a lighter amount of color. I'll show an example later that has heavier color. So I'm using Seedless Preserves, Blueprint Sketch, and Mermaid Lagoon for most of the cards that I'm doing today. After I've applied the amount of color that I want to, I am stamping this Gina K background stamp with some Simon Says Stamp Hot Mama kind of purplish colored ink, just to add some stamped interest to that background. Now the trick to die cut inlay is to use a good adhesive. I'm using a thin double-sided adhesive called Stick It, and you just remove one side of the release paper, stick it down onto your cardstock, and then remove the other side. I'm just using an area of Stick It that is big enough to go behind that window that we have die cut. So I've taken off the release paper, putting the window on it, so now everything that is showing through that window is sticky. So I'm going to take my inked portion out and pop it right in like a puzzle piece. So that's one big piece and then a few smaller pieces. For the smaller pieces, I kind of poke them with my piercer and pick them up and put them where they need to be into that sticky material. Once you have all the pieces in place, you want to press it firmly just to make sure they all stay in place, or you can run it through your die cut machine with a piece of typing paper on top to kind of smush it down and keep it there. Now it's time to add the sentiment, and I chose one from a new Neat and Tangled stamp set. I wanted to be sure I stamped it straight, so I'm using my favorite trick for that, and that is using the Misty stamping tool. I put my card inside, and then I put a clear grid transparency. You can either print your own from their website, or you can buy one already done from Simon Says Stamp, and I'll link to that. I put the transparency over my card, line my stamps up on the transparency, close the door on it. Then I'm ready to stamp it exactly where I want it positioned. I stamped it with Versamark ink and added some silver embossing powder from Hero Arts. Now I did want some sparkle to this piece, so I'm just coloring over it with my Wink of Stella clear shimmer pen and put lots of shine on the background. I did a few coats so it's super shiny. Now for a little bit of embellishment, I have put little dots of some Ranger Multi-Medium and a matte finish. That's tiny little dots of that super strong adhesive, and it dries matte. And I'm adding some tiny little stars of a couple different sizes to the background, and I'll let that dry. So there's the first example of adding some stamping to your inked background to create a smooth looking inlay. Okay, for the next example, I'm going to use the positive and negative spaces of this die to create two cards. So I have first die cut this circle deer scene from some white cardstock. I'm going to apply the Distress inks that I used before, but using an ink blending tool so I can get a heavier, darker amount of color on here. Now I'm not caring too much to blend it because I'm going to spray this with a shimmer mist, which kind of helps it blend because Distress inks react with moisture. So it'll actually help it blend as it dries. Now I've die cut another one of these from some white cardstock, and I'm holding it over some craft foam that has a little dimension to it, and I'm cutting the craft foam to be slightly smaller so I can use this craft foam to add dimension behind it when we glue it to the card. I'm taking that craft foam oval that we created, laying it down on that same double-sided tape that I used earlier called Stick It, pressing it down, and then I'm trimming the excess away from that. So I'm putting sticky onto one side of the craft foam. Now I'm going to remove that release paper so that the sticky is showing. And I'm going to put one of the negative spaces, the white there, onto it. And then I can just pop my little colored pieces into the open areas and they'll stick right onto the stick-it. So you'll end up with a very smooth surface because you're doing the inlay. I then used a fine-tipped white gel pen to add little drops of snow to the background, and I added that all onto a card. I stamped a Love and Joy from an Avery Elle stamp set with Versamark ink, added white embossing powder, and kept this sentiment very simple. I decided not to add any embellishments because we have lots of shine with that shimmer. Now this used some of the pieces from our inking that we did. I took the other piece that was left over and just glued it right onto a white note card and added some silver sequins. So I was able to create 2 cards from that one inked piece. That's one of the nice things of an inlay technique like this, where you put 2 together. Okay, so here is my next example. This might be my favorite of all the cards. This uses another Memory Box Poppy stamp die, and I am die cutting it from the front of a top folding white note card that I created. So I'm just going to run this through my die cut machine. By the way, I'm trying out the new electronic Sizzix die cut machine. I'll let you know how I like it later. Okay, so I have some wide wide Post-it tape here that I'm going to put to the back of the window. The reason I'm doing that Post-it tape to the back is it's going to allow me to hold all these pieces in place that I just die cut while I ink over it, and then we can take it apart. So now I am applying those same Distress ink colors. I'm using Blueprint Sketch and the Mermaid Lagoon, and I'm just quickly applying color here. I'm doing kind of a dark on the bottom and allowing it to lighten up in the center, and then putting the other color in the opposite direction. Now again, I'm not taking much time to blend because I'm going to show you a trick that I do that helps with blending and softening the color. I take a baby wipe and I spritz it a few times with my shimmer mist. And I'm just going to rub this over the area I've inked, not too much because you'll ruin the paper. This helps to blend the colors and leaves a little bit of shimmer behind. So that's another fun trick to getting inked blending very quickly with a little bit of shine. Now watch, as I heat set this, this actually will soften because we applied that water to it, or the moisture from the baby wipe. It's a great way to kind of get a nice blended soft look. So I have another piece of white cardstock that's a little bit smaller than 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I'm covering it with some of the double-sided stick-it adhesive. I'm going to remove the release paper and glue this into the inside of the card. Now when I put this down onto the inside of the card, you'll have that window there where the die cutting is. So I put the release paper down below it so that when I put the sticky piece onto it, it doesn't stick to my grid paper that I'm working on. So I'll just position this on the inside of the card, flip it over, remove the release paper, and now we have that window that has the stickiness showing. So we can take all those inked pieces that we created and just pop them right into place like a puzzle piece. That's the inlay technique. Now for the sentiment, I die cut from some silver glitter cardstock this greetings sentiment. This is from a memory box set. And then I also used a memory box die to create a bunch of little tiny dots and stars. You see the die there on the left. So I popped those out from the silver glitter cardstock. I'm adding tiny bits of glue here and there on the background, and then I'm using my little pickup tool to pick up these and add them to the adhesive. So I'm doing a mix of stars and dots. And check it out, it's just this simple little touch that makes a big difference on this card. And it didn't take too long at all because I could use the negative space for a second card if I wanted to. Okay, so moving right along to the next one, I've got a lot of examples for you today. Now for this one, I actually didn't do any inking. I'm just throwing this one in there. I did that silver glitter cardstock that I just showed you to do an inlay. So you can save time if you don't want to ink by using specialty cardstocks or specialty papers. You could even use pattern papers if you want to. So I have an oval that I hand cut to be slightly smaller than our oval die cut. I covered it with the stick-it adhesive, and then I'm putting that white die cut piece right on top. So I have all that stickiness exposed, and I can pop the glitter cardstock pieces into it like a puzzle. Now, if you'll notice on this die, there are lots of tiny little pieces, and sometimes those are frustrating to kind of pop in place. Here's a trick. Take the silver die cut, put it right over the other, and push those tiny pieces into the adhesive with a knife, a little craft knife, or a piercer. So watch, I lay it right on top and press it in, and it pops it right into that double-sided tape, and just firmly press it there and it'll stay in place. I'll demonstrate this again in a few cards. I also added that die cut sentiment that says greetings, and I stamped Christmas above that using the stamp set that you see here from Poppy Stamps. Now I'm going to glue this onto some craft foam because I want to pop this up off my card. So I just glued it right onto the foam, and then I'm going to take my scissors to kind of tuck underneath the edge so that I cut the craft foam to be slightly smaller so you don't see it from the sides. This gives me some nice even raised dimension when we glue this to the card. For a little bit of pop of color, I die cut a tiny little heart from the die that you see there. I put some shimmer pen on it, and then I'm adding glossy accents so it has some shine. Wanted to keep this card simple, and that little pop of red was really fun. So now I've showed you using distress inks to create an inked inlay piece, also some glitter cardstock. Here I'm going to show you how you can use markers for a colorful inked background for the inlay technique. So I die cut this reindeer window die from some white cardstock, and I have a piece of Post-it tape behind it just to hold the pieces in place while I do this coloring. Now I'm just going to quickly scribble back and forth with some copic markers, and I overlap all the scribbling that I do to help with blending it. You could use Tombow markers for this, you could use distress markers, whatever you want. I am overlapping to blend, but not too much because I kind of like having those stripes and kind of variety in the background. It just adds a little bit of interest. Once I'm done, I sprayed this with some shimmer mist. I actually do it in my shower so I don't get it all over my work surface. And I let that dry. Give it about 5 sprays from about 3 feet above, and that gives a nice even mist of shimmer. Now I have some white cardstock that's slightly smaller than our card that I've covered with that Stick It double-sided tape. And I'm going to stick that onto the back of a white die cut window. So I put that release paper behind it so it doesn't stick onto my grid paper that I'm working on. Can press that down and now flip it over, remove the release paper, and now we have all that open area sticky. So we can pop all of our pieces in place as we did earlier. This one only has a few little pieces and it's worth the extra time. Okay, so now I'm going to put this card into my MISTI, put the grid transparency on top so that I can place my sentiment here from this All Too New stamp set onto it and make sure it's straight. Then I close the door on my MISTI so the stamp is on the door, remove the transparency, ink up my stamp with Versamark ink, stamp it, and then add some silver embossing powder. Using the MISTI and that grid really helps with making sure that your sentiment is straight. So then I added some tiny little die cut stars and dots like I showed you earlier to the background there, and you can see how fun doing that background with your markers can be. Now I wanted to show you another example of doing this coloring, and this uses an ornament die like you see here. This one I'm also going to show you tips for putting all those tiny little pieces in for the inlay technique. So I'm going to die cut from some white cardstock this ornament die, and I'm going to do it from 2 pieces, of course. One will color and one will be the solid white outline. So after I've die cut this, I'm going to take the plates to my work surface and kind of slide the die off and kind of slide the paper off here. So you can see how I slide it off to the side. That helps to make sure all the little pieces stay inside of your paper. That way I can go and I can scribble some marker back and forth, just like I did before, the same colors, so I can get kind of a blending of color on each of these ornaments. So for this particular die, the pieces seem to stay in the cardstock, and I took advantage of that by keeping them all in place and adding the color. Sometimes when you die cut, all the little pieces stay in the die, and I'll show you what to do about that for the die cut inlay technique in another example in this video. After I'm done with my coloring, I'm going to add a little bit of shimmer with a shimmer pen, and it's time to do the inlay technique. So from my second white piece, I just pop out all of the pieces. Then I cover a piece of white cardstock with the Stick It once again. Put my white outline on top of it so that all the open areas have some sticky exposed. Now we can start popping in the pieces. Now the bigger pieces are easy, they just pop right out and you can pop them right back into the new place. But there are lots of tiny little pieces with this die that are hard to get in place individually. So like I demonstrated before, I take the inked piece with all the tiny pieces and line it up over the piece we're trying to move them to. I press all those tiny pieces down into the Stick It with a piercer. So I'm just pressing them down, and then when I pull this off, they'll be stuck in the stick-it adhesive that was exposed. So you can see I'm pushing all those little pieces through, and now they're in place. That really saves quite a bit of time. Now, to make my gray note card shiny, I just put a little bit of that shimmer marker around the edge, and then I can glue the inked piece on top of that and just give some shine on the outside. I used that Avery stamp set that you see there to stamp a sentiment with black ink, and there we have that card. So it takes a little more time to pop those little pieces through, but it's nice for a special card. Okay, so now we have one more example here. This is a good example if you find all your pieces stick into your die when you do the die cutting. There are ways to release it, but I wanted to show you that you can use it to your advantage for this technique. So once again, I'm just creating a background with lots of copic markers colored back and forth to get a blended sky. Now this time I'm actually going to die cut the colored piece. So I'm going to take this window Santa sleigh scene and just lay it right onto our inked background here, and I'll run it through my die cut machine. Now I notice when I do this that my pieces stay in the die, and I really want them to stay there. So what I do is I kind of slide it off my plate and I flip it over, and you can see all the pieces stayed there except one tiny little one, which I can add by hand. Now I have a piece of white cardstock that I covered with stick-it adhesive, and watch this. I'm going to take that stickiness and put my die right down onto it. I'm going to press my die down. All of those colored little die cut pieces are in there. Now I'm going to use my piercer to poke through each of those tiny holes. Those tiny holes allow you to release your little pieces from the die. So I'm basically pushing through there, pushing those little pieces onto this sticky white cardstock. So all the tiny pieces will stick there. The big pieces won't. The big pieces will stay in your die, but that's okay. We can manually take those big pieces and pop it in place. It's those tiny ones that we don't want to do by hand. So now I'm going to stick all the bigger pieces right in place, and that saved me a lot of time putting those tiny little die cut pieces into the inlay. So that's just another technique you can do if you find your pieces are staying in the die. I went ahead and trimmed the excess from around that, put some craft foam on the back, and now I'll glue this onto the front of a white note card. I have this stamp set from My Favorite Things. I picked a sentiment from that, inking it up with Versamark ink and stamping it right below and adding some silver embossing powder. Okay, so in this video, I've thrown a lot of tips at you for creating inked inlay cards. Inlay is such a beautiful technique. I encourage you to check what dies you have and try some of the different tips I shared with you. Some tips work better with other dies than others do, so just play around with it and see what you can come up with. This is a great way to get more out of dies you have, especially window dies like the ones I've been using in today's video. I hope you'll give these techniques a try. They're so much fun. Let me know if you have any questions. All the supplies I use for these mini cards are linked below in my YouTube description, along with information for the Caring Hearts card drive. Also, be sure to check out the videos here in the middle. I think that they might be of interest to you also. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon, and sorry for the long video. Have a great day.